Love is a burning thing, and it makes a fiery ring. Bound by wild desire, I fell into a ring of fire. I fell into a burning ring of fire. I went down, 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 and the flames went higher. And it burns, 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 the ring of fire, the ring of fire. I fell into a burning ring of fire. I went down, 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 and the flames went higher. And it burns, 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 the ring of fire, the ring of fire. The taste of love is sweet when hearts like ours meet. I fell for you like a child. Oh, but the fire went wild. I fell into a burning ring of fire. I went down, 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 and the flames went higher. And it burns, 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 the ring of fire, the ring of fire. I fell into a burning ring of fire. I went down, 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 and the flames went higher. And it burns, 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 the ring of fire, the ring of fire. And it burns, 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 the ring of fire, the ring of fire, the ring of fire. It is 12:34 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on June 4th, 2019. Welcome to Mitch Miller's podcast, The Black Hole, where I go down, 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 900 feet underground. That's right, it's the podcast about a coal miner, former handyman / artist, that now spends his time deep underground. I've been on hiatus for a week. I had a trip planned to New Orleans before I was hired at the mine that they allowed me to take. So it's been a week off, but I'm back to the grind. And a little ominous tonight before my shift. Someone came out on a stretcher from the last shift. Looks like they hurt their leg or their knee or something like that. There's big screen TVs in the lamp room. That's the room where everybody gathers to go underground. There's big screen TVs that display work injuries. There's quite a few in the coal mine. I guess they factor that into their business model. Tonight, spent the first 4 hours recovering power cables. So these power cables are probably about 2 to 2.5 inches thick. They have a corrugated sheath around them. The ends of them look like giant plugs that are round and screw in. They weigh about 10 pounds, 15 pounds a piece. The cable's very heavy. I guess we were moving about 50-foot sections of it, and it took 5 guys to move those sections, and then we spooled it up on a rail car. We did 12 of them. Took us about 3 hours, an hour to get in, and about 3 hours of dragging cable out, about 400 feet through 2 little doors and onto the cable car. And that's pretty much the bulk of what I did tonight. Moved another thing with the scoop, but that was about it. It is June 5th, 2019 at 12:51 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, USA. Just got off my shift at the coal mine, and for the past 2 nights, a female federal inspector has been coming in on the afternoon shift to inspect the mine. Apparently, from what I can hear, she used to work at this mine. Now she's a federal mine inspector. At first I thought it was a female on our afternoon shift, but it just turns out that it's a federal inspector. It's still an all-male shift as far as I know. There is one female on the night shift, the midnight shift. I don't know about the day shift. It's pretty white male dominated industry, I feel like, coal mining. There is one black male on our shift. He's pretty old. Anyway, tonight we moved. I was with the belt crew that serviced the conveyor belts, and we used a scoop to move a piece of equipment off of a rail car. It was like 3 big drums or rollers, one small, one medium, one large, all mounted on a box, and it's for a take-up for the main conveyor belt line. I think it sits next to the conveyor belt motor, and the belt weaves in and out of these big rollers. Anyhow, we had to drag it off of a rail car onto a scoop. It was too big for the scoop bucket, so we had to chain it to it, and we used the winch. The scoop has a winch on it with a rope, but I always get a little nervous with something that heavy with a rope winch, because the rope could snap and hit somebody in the face. It's all a little spooky, to say the least. Then later we unloaded 108 pieces of all thread. I would say most of the 100 of the pieces were 1 inch in diameter, and there were 8 pieces that were about 2.5 to 3 inches in diameter. And all thread, for those of you that don't know, I know I've been a handyman and contractor, and for some people maybe listening to this podcast, they may not understand all the terminology, even though I'm trying my best to explain it. There's given things in the construction trades that some people don't know, but a piece of all thread is like a bolt without a head. It's usually more than 1 foot long. These pieces were 4 feet long, or maybe 5 feet long. Pretty heavy to carry on your shoulders. Anyway, a piece of all thread is like a bolt without a head, so that you can screw a nut on either end of it. You can come from either direction with a nut on the piece of all thread. That's why it gets its name, all thread, because it's threaded the whole way from end to end. Anyway, we unloaded that. Then we had to spot rollers for the belt line. So the inspector tagged a bunch of rollers on the conveyor belt that had seized up. After a certain amount of time, the bearings go and they seize up and they're no longer functioning. She tagged a bunch of those as violations, so we had to get the new rollers and get them into place so that the midnight shift can get them replaced by 7 o'clock this morning, because that's what's required from the federal inspector. So that was my night tonight. I got a little bit of overtime. Pretty hard night on the shoulder blades the past 2 nights, carrying things on the shoulders, but I'm not complaining. It is June 6, 2019 at 12:22 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, USA. This is Mitch Miller's podcast, The Black Hole. The story about a person becoming a coal miner in southwestern Pennsylvania. I just got off my shift, and I forgot to mention earlier in the week that a friend of mine or someone I work with told me that last week there was a little bit of a commotion. Apparently, they figured out that spray foam, which they use a lot of in the mine to seal up walls for ventilation and things, there are two tanks that combine and spray out a foam. They found out that if you spray that foam too thick, it can begin to smolder and create smoke, and it did last week. Now, I've seen it caked on pretty thick before, but apparently you're supposed to put on a few inches, then let it dry, then apply another few inches instead of putting it on inches thick. And on Monday, when we were moving those jumper cables, which I've heard them called, those high voltage electrical cables with the plugs on the end, we were in the area where the spray foam began to smolder, and there were chunks of foam with black ash on it, as though they had almost caught on fire or had caught on fire. So that was the commotion last week. Tonight, we had a list of items to do. We cleaned up spillage on one of the overcasts. Now, an overcast is where one airway crosses over another airway, but they don't combine. Or in this case, it's where one belt line went over a shaft of air, so it is one airway over one airway. And we had to shovel the spillage and shovel that up onto the belt. So kind of like what I did a few weeks ago with the haystacks. Then we had to set some posts. We set a post. Now, the reason to set a wood 6x6 post is that you have to have a roof bolt within 4 feet of the rib. So when the rib rolls or falls, if you have rib fall, meaning the rib has actually crumbled to the ground and collapsed, you usually set a post near there if you don't have roof bolts near it and rib bolts. So we had to set a post. We spotted the post or found the post, and we had a hacksaw, had to use hand tools. Apparently there are chainsaws in the mine, but only the daylight crew gets them. So we cut it by hand to our measurement. First we dug out the base, dug down to a solid layer, then measured, then cut the post, then used a cap block and wedges and hammered it into place so that it was wedged in against the roof. Then we had to spot a couple things, meaning we had to put a couple items in place. One was a probe, which is like an extension pole with a gripper at the end to hold things. We had to put that in place and put caps on a couple of the water lines. And then finally we hung a cross under the belt line, which was like a cage. We hung that up under the belt line and did some more shoveling. That was pretty much the night. So, thanks for listening. June 7th, 2019, at 12:34 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, USA. Friday. Just got done with my shift. And tonight, we drug 17 blocks along the belt line. And I'll explain what dragging is again. I think I explained it before, but I'll go into better detail because it is a very important job. You see on the belt line, it's all sealed off on the conveyor belt line. Has its own air. And there's a couple-inch layer of dust on the floor, of rock dust, on the floor in most areas. What you do when you drag is you mix that layer of dust, rock dust, with the layer of black coal dust that settles on top of it from the conveyor belt running 24/7. So a fire boss comes through before every shift in the coal mine, and fire bosses the belt line and the whole mine for safety. That fire boss will pick out certain blocks that need to be drug because that fine coal dust settled on top of the rock dust and on top of everything in that entry. Now the coal dust is like gunpowder almost. It's highly flammable. If you put a lighter to it, it would turn into a fireball. And if you had the entire belt line covered in black coal dust, eventually these rollers that the conveyor belt rests on that are constantly rolling, sometimes a bearing goes out of those and they heat up red hot and they could start to throw sparks off. Now this could ignite that black coal dust and make a giant fireball explosion in the entire belt line area. That's why they fire boss it and why we have inspectors that test the coal dust. What you do is you mix that black coal dust in with the rock dust and it neutralizes it. It makes it only about 5% flammable. So that's what dragging is in a nutshell. It's a very important job. It's mixing that rock dust, the fire retardant rock dust, with the coal dust so that it's not just an entire entry covered in coal dust with moving parts that could heat up and spark. Not that there aren't sparks in the coal mine itself, and it just goes to show that there's good ventilation because there is coal dust. If there was coal dust in the air that was at a high enough concentration to ignite, it surely would with all the sparks that fly off of the trolley pole and the wheels of the man trips and other moving rail cars. So that's what I did tonight. Found out it was a Thursday. They post the draft list for Saturdays. Not everyone has to work on Saturdays, but they draft and have mandatory Saturdays for those that get drafted. I found out that I do work on Saturday and have mandatory overtime. But I consider myself lucky because a lot of guys have to stay in for 10-hour shifts 3 times a week. I've been getting out after an 8-hour shift on most nights, with the exception of a few nights. And they have what is called a hot seat for the section guys. If you work up on the section, which is actually mining coal, they all ride in on a man trip, and the old crew, the previous shift, rides out on that same man trip. So it's a hot seat situation. So they get in there, it takes an hour to get into the section. They work 8 hours, then they wait for the new shift to come in on their man trip, and that takes an hour, and then they go out an hour. It is Saturday, June 8th, 2019 at 12:16 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, USA. Just got off my shift. Found out right before shift that the revised Saturday work list would be posted when we got out of the mine. And it turns out I don't have to work today on Saturday. I don't have to work today, what would be considered tomorrow. Afternoon shift, because there's an issue with the rail line that transports the coal. There was a sinkhole somewhere along the rail line. If they can't get the coal out, they can't get they run at low production staff. Tonight we cleaned 53 blocks of trash from the rail line. So I was picking up water bottles, Mountain Dew bottles, Monster Energy drink cans, sandwich baggies, snack cake wrappers, all kinds of stuff that litter the rail line. We did 53 blocks of litter pickup. So not too much to say about that. It still has its dangers. You could get hit by a moving man trip or train. And you have 300 volts of electricity on your trolley line right at head level at all times. But I do want to get right into, because it's the end of the week, I want to get into illicit government. Does the United States have an illegal government? Do we live under an illegal government? But first I want to start off by saying that now that I'm a coal miner, I am pro-Republican because they are not anti-coal. I am, however, ambivalent Trump. So I'm not necessarily pro-Trump, I'm ambivalent Trump, but I do agree with some fundamental things that Trump is trying to do, namely raising tariffs on foreign imports to grow the manufacturing base of the United States of America. I agree with this tactic, and I agree with this total effort, and I think that if you look at things from even if you want to look at climate change and things like that, if you grow the manufacturing base in the United States, we produce goods in one of the safest ways of any industrialized nation, and usually the most energy efficient way of any industrialized nation. So by growing the manufacturing base here and making more products here, we are saving workers' lives. And if you keep even if you have to offer low-cost energy to grow the manufacturing base, cheap energy, even if the United States keeps its energy mix approximately the same, but you grow the manufacturing base, you can maybe shut down coal-fired power plants in China or India to address climate change. So I'd hate to say shut down coal-fired power plants, but it could be a nuclear power plant too, because in my opinion, nuclear is just as dirty as coal. So illegal government. So the basic concept here as to why our government may be illegal is that, and this is going back to United States high school, we learn about the federal government, and I'm addressing the federal government here. You have a three-tiered system of checks and balances. You have three branches: the judicial branch, the executive branch, and the legislative branch. So the whole reason I say that it's illegal is that I do not believe that you can have elections when one of the three tiers is disabled. I think that's illegal, and if the government isn't functioning at full checks and balance status, then you shouldn't be able to have elections. So this doesn't just apply to Donald Trump, but it applies to all the senators and representatives that were elected in that election cycle when the judicial branch, the Supreme Court, the head of the judicial branch, the Supreme Court, was disabled. It only had 8 members. The Congress would not approve President Obama's appointment, so it's laid vacant for the longest period of time in the United States history, nearly a year, and this is illegal. I think it's illegal to hold elections while this happens. The judicial branch, it's very clear in the legislative branch, which is Congress, that you have a 2/3 majority vote to overcome a veto. There's very specific rules as to what the ratio of voting is, and the judicial branch is designed to have a 5-4 decision, a 1-vote difference decision, and when it's disabled, when there's only 8 members, it has to have a 5-3 decision, which means 2 extra votes in agreement with whatever they're doing. So just to go over the checks and balances, and it's my theory that the judicial branch should be in charge of the elections of the President of the United States, the executive branch, because Congress checks the President by overriding vetoes, and Congress checks the judiciary by approving appointees. The President, the executive branch, checks Congress with a veto. It can veto legislation, and the executive branch, the President, checks the judiciary by appointing appointees to the Supreme Court. The judicial branch checks Congress by being able to declare a law unconstitutional, but to my knowledge, to my rudimentary high school knowledge, there's no check for the executive branch. There's no judicial check of the executive branch, and that's why I think that they are actually responsible for facilitating the elections of the United States President, the executive branch. So it's my theory that the Supreme Court could actually abolish the Electoral College, and I think that Hillary Clinton has one of the best cases because she won the popular vote, but Trump won the Electoral College votes. And I think there's precedent here because the Electoral College could be declared unconstitutional. This is because in the original Constitution, which also said that the judicial branch is the head of the Navy, in the original Constitution, federal senators were supposed to be appointed by the state legislature. So that was the Republican style of electing senators for the federal government, was that the state legislature put forward 2 senators. Now, somewhere in the Constitution, it was changed so that all federal senators win by popular vote. So when they changed that Constitution to reflect that federal senators should be elected by popular vote, it's my belief that they should have abolished the Electoral College and made the executive branch, the President of the United States, elected by popular vote as well. So that's my case for why Hillary Clinton has a good case. And I honestly think the Democrats should put forward this case. I mean, instead of attacking Donald Trump or trying to impeach Donald Trump, why not do something productive and finally abolish the Electoral College by taking a case to the Supreme Court? So that's my rant, I guess you could call it, on it's just discourse, I guess, for this podcast. I do it at the end of every week, and it's my theory as to why we live in the United States under an illegal government. All people elected during the 2016 elections are illegal, and in my opinion, all elected officials after that election are illegal because the judicial branch was disabled. We did not have a functioning, healthy system of checks and balances as the federal government was designed. And frankly, I think that FISA court, the foreign spy court,
should have shut down when the judiciary was shut down as well.